This meeting is being recorded. This recording is being needed. Oh, let's enable the waiting room. Nice. Did I clock in? Yeah. Jean, not Gina, Jean. Yeah, I do want to do that. This coffee's gross. Why am I making gross coffee all the time right now? Ooh. Hi, everybody. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Right. Cool, right on. So let me just make sure that the waiting room is disabled real quick, and then I'm going to upload a few things into the chat, and then we'll start. Yeah, waiting room's disabled. All right, so just 1 minute while I upload a few things into the chat. So the first thing that I'm uploading is the PowerPoint slides that I'll be using today. And then I'll also upload just a couple of handouts that you can use separate from the PowerPoint. All right, the slides have been uploaded. And now there's a PDF on practicing presentations. And then this last one is effective public speaking. So I know a couple of you have been to the previous webinars, so you'll already have those PDFs, but you won't have the PowerPoint. So now I'm going to share screens with that. Can y'all see the PowerPoint? Yeah. All right, cool. So we'll go ahead and start. My goal today is to have this be a little bit shorter, hopefully about 30 minutes. It's funny, last time in the last webinar, I was hoping it would be 45 minutes and it was exactly an hour. So we'll see how this goes. But what we're talking about today in this final webinar about presentation skills is just practice and preparation, which is why it'll be a little bit shorter because there's not really, I mean, there are some specific things that you can do, but the most important thing to practice and prepare for your presentation is to just say it a lot. The more times you practice, the better you'll be. So here's a preview of how it'll go. I'll give an introduction because we do have a couple of people here that weren't in the previous webinars. I know a couple of people were here, so they know about me and my background, but we'll go through that again. We'll go through some of the keys for practicing and preparation. I'll give you some tips on how to practice in each stage of the presentation development process, and then we'll wrap up. I have a picture of a stretching elephant there for no reason. I just really like it. I've never seen an elephant stretching before, and I think it's amazing. So that's why that's there. So who I am, my name is Matthew Higgins. I work for the Center for Writing and Rhetoric as a communication specialist. It's a fancy way to say public speaking coach. My bachelor's degree and my master's degree are both in communication from the University of New Mexico. The bachelor's is interpersonal communication, so that's one-on-one, person-to-person, whereas my master's is intercultural, so it's looking at how cultures communicate. I specifically looked at the relationship between communication and resilience, how we can develop resilience through our interactions. And here at CGU, I'm working on that aspect of culture and resilience for organization. So my degree is positive organizational psychology. During my graduate degree at the University of New Mexico, I taught public speaking. I think I taught like 8 or 9 different courses. It was 2 every semester for about 3 years. I also taught nonverbal communication. I taught intro to communication, and I worked for the business department doing public speaking assessments. So one of their criteria for accreditation is that they teach public speaking to their students. So I observed about 50 to 60% of all presentations delivered in that department in a 2-year span. So I watched a ton of presentations. I taught workshops, in-person webinars. And then I also worked one-on-one with business pitch competition groups. And then now I teach strategic business communication for Rice University. So I have an extensive background in communication. But before all of that, before graduate school, I was a basketball coach. And the reason why I bring that up is because it heavily informs the way I approach public speaking as a skill. So as a basketball coach, my primary focus was on skill development. My last basketball coaching job was as the head skill development coach for a university. And I guess the primary approach for developing basketball skills is to start small and then build outward, right? You start with those basic skills and then you start layering in the more advanced things. That's basically the approach I use for practicing presentations as well. So you start small and then start building outwards. And you'll see that as we go through this. So that's who I am. I really love teaching public speaking. Most people hate it. And I enjoy helping people hate it a little bit less. So that's the goal. So here are the keys for practicing. Um, there's three, essentially, there's two though. Articulate and practice a lot. They're for the most part the same thing. But what I mean by articulate is that to practice your presentation, you have to actually practice saying the things. We experience language in three different ways, right? We think, and we usually think in our language. And if we're multilingual, we think in those languages. But we also experience language through speaking, and we experience language through writing and reading. But all three of those are different processes, right? Thinking is different from speaking, writing is different from thinking, and writing is different from speaking. So to prepare for your presentation, which is articulation, you have to articulate it a lot. You can't just think about what you're going to say. You can't just think about what you want to say. You can't just write down what you want to say. You have to actually say it. You've got to say the things as many times as you possibly can, which is why that second key there is just practice a lot. And then the last key for practicing and preparing for your presentations is to just understand that being nervous is normal, that the anxiety that you feel, it is a very common human experience. So I've got this photo on the slide. I would like to offer a disclaimer that I don't know how reliable those statistics are. That came from just a Google search of public speaking anxiety. But when you do legitimate searches to try to find some statistics like this, you'll see that the majority of them show that upwards of 70% of people are somewhat afraid of public speaking, right? So just remember that, right? When you're feeling nervous and that you hate presenting, just know that it's normal. At this point in my life, I've delivered what feels like 1,000 presentations when you factor in all of the coaching stuff plus all of the teaching. And I still get nervous for every single one of them. I was still mildly nervous for this one today. So just remember, as you're preparing for your presentation, that anxious feeling is normal. And it's also going to grow as you get closer to that presentation. You know, maybe 6 days out, you feel a little bit nervous, but 6 minutes before the presentation, you feel tremendously nervous. But knowing that it's normal can help you just kind of ignore that and focus on the task at hand. So again, the keys for preparing and practicing are articulate a lot. You have to actually say the things that you intend on saying, practice as many times as you possibly can, and accept that those nervous and anxious feelings are normal. It's part of being a human being. So let's move on to the next one. Actually, let's go to slideshow. So what we're going to do now is I'll give you some tips on how to practice articulating your content and your material in each stage of the presentation building process, right? So this one is about the very, very beginning. So you want to start off by actually saying the answers to these very basic questions that you see here on the left, right? So you're assigned a presentation. First thing you want to do is ask yourself, what is my topic? And say it out loud. Today, my topic is presentation skills. My details are, I'm talking about how to practice and how to prepare. And my point is that you have to practice by articulating a lot and that the nerves are normal, right? So actually saying those things at the very beginning helps you understand what you want to say, how to say it, and then it helps you start to filter out some of the things that you don't want to say, right? It helps you build out your presentation, but you want to do that by talking. You don't want to do that by writing. Your notes, they help, but they're not the point of the presentation. The point of the presentation is speaking. So you want to speak as soon as possible. So start by audibly answering those three questions. And then to transition from this very, very simple outline, these three questions, to help you transition into this more basic outline, the things you want to do is have conversations, practice reframing, and identifying what the wrong answer is, right? So having conversations, one of the best things you can do is call up a friend. You can also use me as well. You can email me and say, hey, I need to talk out my presentation. Do you have time? And we can do that. That's one of the services that I offer. But you just want to have simple conversations about what your presentation is. That helps you mentally organize the things you want to say. That'll help you identify what your main points are and what the details of those main points are. And that can help you identify what your conclusion is as well, right? And this idea of practice reframing, that's about answering these questions in a different way. So, what is my topic? Presentation skills. All right, well, how can I reframe that? Well, I'm talking about effective presentation. All right, so there's a way to reframe my topic. What are the details? Practicing and preparation. Well, the details are about how to practice and things you should do to prepare. So that's a simple reframing. I'm saying the same thing, but the more times that I say the same thing, the easier it is going to be in that moment of the presentation. And then it is very helpful to identify what the wrong answer is. So my topic is presentation skills, but it's not about reciting scripted presentations. My details are about practicing in preparation, but it's not necessarily about very specific activities to do. It's more general principles, general guidelines. And my main point is that you have to articulate a lot and that the nerves are normal. Well, the wrong answer would be that my main point is to script out your speech, right? So identifying and saying these things audibly, talk these things out as much as possible. That helps you build your outline from this most basic one into this slightly more detailed one. But you're doing it through talking because, again, that's the point of the presentation. It is to talk. So your goal is articulatory saturation. It's a really fancy word for saying as much as you possibly can, right? So the best thing you can do once you've got it in this basic outline is, again, if you can talk to somebody, if you can call a friend, or if you want to email me and we do it through Zoom, but you want to say as much as you possibly can about each one of these sections. Just talk it out. Doesn't have to be structured. It can be right. It can be wrong. It can be perfectly related to your presentation. It can be somewhat related, but not really. It's about just saying as much as you possibly can in that beginning stages. And that helps you organize it. And then you can start taking notes to actually building the presentation how you want, which takes us to our next stage. So you want to get to this full outline, right? Where you've got your attention grabber, you've got your introduction, you've got your preview, and then all of these important pieces of engaging presentations. So now you've built it. Now you need to start practicing the actual presentation itself. Rather than just saying everything that you know about the topic, you want to say it in that presentation format, those very specific key points. And there's some guidelines on how to practice those things. And the first one is the 3-to-1 ratio for practice. So for every 1 minute that you're expecting to speak, practice your presentation 3 times, which it can sound overwhelming, right? Like I'm planning on speaking for 30 minutes, which would mean I should practice my presentation 90 times. That sounds like a lot, but you can break it up into smaller chunks, right? So you can practice it just one time, full presentation. These are all the things I want to say. Just practice it, but take notes as you're practicing it, right? Don't worry about timing it. Just take notes as you're going. I liked when I said this. I didn't like saying this. I don't need to include this part, or I should emphasize this key statistic a little bit more, or I need to slow down when I'm saying this point, right? Taking notes like that. And then once you've done that, you see that bigger picture of how the presentation will go, break it up into note cards. So you've got each one in this full outline, you've got each one of these individual parts, right? You've got your attention grabber, your introduction, your preview, your main point, the detail of the main point. Put each one of those on a note card and then randomize them. Pull one out and recite that section only. Rehearse that individual part. And it can be as short as 30 seconds, right? Because it could be just that supporting statistic that you have. You recite just that statistic. That's okay, because you need to get practice articulating each of the individual parts. So you go through your note cards and you've practiced each one, right? So on here in this full outline, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. Looks like we've got 17. I would have 17 individual note cards. And so if I practiced each one of those pieces twice, I've now done 34 rounds of practice, contributing to that 90 total that I'm hoping to reach, right? So each time you practice articulating a section, that counts. Again, it's about articulate, articulate, articulate. So go through those note cards, practice them out of order. That's really helpful for you in the presentation, where we all have these moments where we forget where we are. We're talking and we're just, oh, I don't know where I am. Well, if you practice out of order, that really helps you be skilled in finding your place again because you know what each individual part is. And then when you've practiced it in order, you see how they come together as a cohesive piece. So it's really helpful to practice in order and out of order as well, those individual sections. So then once you've gone through and you've practiced each individual section as its own at least one time, then you want to start putting it together as a cohesive, larger presentation. So you want to record yourself now delivering that whole presentation. And the reason why we say to record yourself is so that you can, one, see how the presentation looks, but you can also start paying attention to the nonverbal aspects. And we went over those in detail a lot in the previous webinar, but some of those nonverbal details could be your hand gestures, your eye contact, paying attention to your volume. If you're using a lot of filler terms and filler sounds like the word like or the sound when you record yourself, you can pay attention to those things and see if there's too much or too little and what you need to change. So once you've practiced those individual sections, now you want to practice the whole presentation just one time, record it, and pay attention to those things and see if you want to record it and practice it a few more times. You want to do these things before you build your PowerPoint slides. And the reason is because if we build our PowerPoint slides first, they subconsciously become the focal point of the presentation. We don't want that. We want the speaking, the articulation to be the focal point of the presentation. So that needs to come first. The PowerPoint slides are presentation aids. They're there to help. So build your presentation slides as an aid. So you do the presentation first. How can my slide help this section? How can my slide help this section? So that not only familiarizes yourself with the content, with the order, with the structure, but it also helps keep the focus on you as the presenter and takes it off the slides because your slides can be distracting if they become the focal point. So once you practice that full outline and then you've built your slides, then you can start practicing with your technology. So we're on a new slide now. I don't notice if you saw that slight change. It was only on the left column here, right? So it's about taking notes on your practice, using those individual cards, record yourself, then build your slides, and then start practicing your presentation with your slides. So now you're practicing that whole thing as a cohesive unit where it's the whole presentation, each section, boom, 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 but you're also adding in the slide factor. Because one of the things that can be very distracting is if you're going through your presentation in the moment, but your slides are out of order and you didn't realize it because you didn't practice your presentation with the slides. So it can be distracting, but it can also be part of your engagement. You can be more engaging if you're effectively using technology. So if you're using PowerPoint or presentation slides, but also if you're using Zoom as well, if you're delivering a presentation that might be using breakout rooms, practice your presentation in its full, including setting those breakout rooms, right? So when I practiced my presentation, when I practiced this earlier today, I practiced saying, I would appreciate if y'all would give me a moment at the beginning here so I can upload these files into the chat. I talked that out. That way I would have practice articulating what my point is in that moment. And it just helps me be prepared. So practice using all of your technology. Make sure your slides are in the right order. Make sure if you're going to be showing a video in your presentation that you know that what second it starts at, right? Sometimes we use a video that's 45 minutes long and we know that we're going to be playing it at the 24-minute, 32-second mark. We'll practice that. Practice getting it set. Make sure that you have your settings right on sharing screen in Zoom because the default mode for share screen in Zoom doesn't include audio. So you need to practice going into those settings and selecting share audio as well. So these are all some of the things that you need to practice as you're developing your presentation. And as your presentation grows, you're talking it out the entire time. We're starting at this very basic level, talking out the answers to these questions, talking it out as we're building it one section at a time, and then talking it out as a cohesive unit where we're saying the entire presentation while also using our technology at the same time. Yeah, Carmen, did you have a question?
Yes. Considering the amount of times you need to practice, how much time before your actual presentation do you recommend to start both building your presentation and practicing?
So it kind of depends on you. At this point, I don't necessarily follow the 3-to-1 ratio for practice for all of my presentations. For things like this, public speaking, I've presented on it so many times now that I don't have to have as much preparation. But if it's a presentation that I haven't given before, I schedule in as much time as I possibly can for preparation, right? And so that's the other thing, is it's scheduling in as much time as I possibly can. We're busy. We don't always have a lot of time to practice a presentation 80 times. So it's about looking at your schedule. But the keys to delivering effective presentations are practicing articulating as many times as possible. So you want to look at your own schedule. If you have only 2 days to prepare, well, you want to start right away. But if you have more time, then it depends on that. So it's about your comfortability with the content. It's about your comfortability with the format of the presentation. And it's about how much time you actually have. But my best advice is try to commit as much time as you possibly can to it. Again, depending on how well you know that content already. Did that help? Cool.
Yes, thank you.
And this last little bullet point I have down here, this is just a guideline. It's not a hard rule that you have to follow, but you should try to practice your presentation in full with all of your technology and presentation aids at least 5 times. Even if it's just a 2-minute presentation. Again, it's going to be harder if you have like an hour-long presentation, but the more times that you can practice it in full, the better. So moving on, we've gone through, oh yeah, Carmen, did you have another question?
Yeah, sorry. I'm just thinking, what if you need to present in a group?
Yeah.
What do you recommend for practicing then?
So stick with that idea of breaking it into sections, right? So each person in your group has a specific section. Practice your section, but you really, if you can, and so that makes it even harder because you've got that group dynamic. If you can, you want to practice the presentation in full as a group 3, 4, 5 times. That's really important. It's really important to have that, because I've assessed a lot of group presentations, and it's really easy to tell the difference between a group that practiced together versus a group that only practiced their individual parts. There's this level of cohesion that is missing from the group that only practiced individual parts, and it affects that whole presentation. And one of the things that you see in those is that there's really ineffective transitions where the individual person will deliver their part and then they're just, I'm done. And Bob's going to go next. It makes it awkward. But the groups that practice together, they're very efficient at tying their individual sections to the next one, tying their sections to the previous one. So what you want to do is, just communicate with your group like, hey, it's very important that as a unit, we practice this presentation a few times together. So actually the best thing to do would be to practice individual parts, practice together a couple of times, and then have another period where you can refine your individual parts, and then come back and practice as a group at least 2 more times, and then you'll really be prepared.
Okay.
And then the other thing to do when it comes to group presentations, especially when they're using slides, is establishing how you're going to be maneuvering the slides. So you can kind of have it where you have one person just controlling the slides the whole time, or you can set it to where each person controls the slide for their own particular presentation. And you can do that on Zoom or in person, where you have the one person doing it, or you can do it where you have each person is a co-host in the Zoom, so they can share their screen and control the slides how they want. It doesn't really matter what you set or how you decide to do it. It just matters that your whole group knows that that's what you're going to do, and that as a group you practice doing it that way. So yeah, excellent question. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Any other questions before we move on to the next part? No, right on. So we talked about preparing in those early stages, right? It's about talking out the answers to those very basic questions, and then having conversations about your content to get you to that little bit bigger and more robust outline. And then when you've got that full outline, it's about practicing those individual parts, preparing as a group, preparing the whole presentation. And now we're on that last part, right? The day of the presentation, or just a couple of days before the presentation, usually just 2 days. This is when your anxiety is usually the highest as well. So the things you want to do the day of or the day before, if you can, practice your presentation in full at least one time. Again, it's hard, right? We have very busy schedules, and sometimes our presentation is at the end of the day, and it's a day where everything is scheduled back to back to back, so we don't have that time to practice. But if you can, practice that presentation in full at least one time. Use your note cards to quiz yourself on the sections. So you pull one out and it says main point 2. You don't have to recite the whole thing. Just ask yourself, what is main point 2? Main point 2 is how to prepare in the early building stages. Main point 3 is how to prepare day of, things like that. That just helps you know what that section is and what you're going to talk about. That's a good way to lightly prepare. Another thing to do is to continually reiterate, restate what your main point is. My main point is that preparing for presentations is about practice, and it is about accepting that being nervous is normal. Those are my 2 main points. I've been saying those things all morning. Every chance I got, I just restated and reiterated that point, because we want our audience to remember that. And if we're not skilled in saying that main point, it's going to be harder for them to retain it. So just, that's a really effective way, or a way to prepare for your presentation, because we can sometimes get lost in our own details. But at the end of the day, if we can effectively and clearly communicate our main point, that is the most important thing. That's really the only thing that matters, is that our audience comes away with that main point. So focus on that and articulate it as much as you possibly can in preparation, and it'll help you in the moment. And then you also want to familiarize yourself with the slides, go through it a few times. You don't have to rehearse everything you'll say per slide, but just make sure they're in the right order. Make sure they have the images and the fonts and the content that you want. Just go through them quickly. And then lastly, prepare your other presentation aids. So have your video open, have it set to that right starting point. Make sure you know what time to stop it. Make sure that if you're going to play your video all the way to the end, that you stop it from auto playing that next video. Those are some of the things that you can do to prepare to stop those in the moment distractions, because they can be difficult to deal with in the moment. So the better prepared we are for them prior, the more skilled we'll be at coping with them should they come up. Now, the right side of the slide, that other column, that's all about the anxiety. That's about the nerves. These are some of the things that we can do to address the anxiety. Now, the first thing to remember about being nervous and being anxious is there's never going to be one thing that you can do that will take away all of your anxiety. That's not how it works. Think of it as like a big number, and we do small things to get that number a little bit lower. So maybe your anxiety is at a 10, right? But you do a little bit of breathing beforehand to bring your anxiety down to a 9. You put on your favorite shirt. You take control of your attire, right? You know what you're supposed to wear. You know you're supposed to dress professionally, but you wear your favorite tie, or you wear your favorite socks. You take control of that situation. That brings your anxiety down to an 8.5. You familiarize yourself with the physical setting. If you're delivering your presentation in person, you know it's a stage. You know you have a microphone. You know you have a lectern, those kinds of things. That brings your anxiety down to an 8. Another thing to do is pay attention to your diet, right? Like maybe don't drink a cup of coffee immediately before your presentation. That's going to make your anxiety feel stronger. You can be aware of some of the foods that you eat that don't make you feel great, right? Like eating a lot of bread makes my stomach not feel great. So I try not to eat big sandwiches before a presentation, just things like that. Also, too, make sure you're hydrated, or make sure you're not overhydrated. Those really small things, those moments where we can take control of the situation, they bring your anxiety down a notch, but they also bring your confidence up a notch, right? Gives you that sense of control, that sense of mastery, where you have control over the situation. You're ready and you're prepared. Those really small things. So if we can accumulate the small things and bring down the small things, you'll see the anxiety comes down while the confidence goes up. and it makes it easier to forget about that anxiety. Now, the two most important things about addressing anxiety and addressing your confidence prior to a presentation are: one, speak early, and two, your self-talk. So speak early, that has a little bit to do with, ideally it's in a live setting. So even before your presentation, if you can just ask somebody in the audience, right? Like maybe you're standing waiting to go up on the stage and there's an audience member sitting next to you, just ask them how they're doing. Just get a little bit of practice speaking. Address people in the audience early, right? Before you start your presentation, ask somebody, how are you doing today? All right, well, now we'll start, right? So speaking early, your presentation is a speaking activity. So the more you speak, the easier it'll be. So speak early, make eye contact early. That's why a lot of times in Zoom meetings, you'll see at the beginning, professors or the person running the webinar will ask just people, how are y'all doing? This idea of jumping straight into the presentation, it's a little harder. So if you can speak early, that will help you bring some anxiety down because you're starting that speaking process. Usually once we start talking, the nerves start to go away or we just start to focus on them less. So speaking early is a very important part. And then that last one is self-talk. And for me, this is the most important. And that's what the picture down below it, treat yourself. That's what it's all about. Speak to yourself kindly. Speak to yourself in a supportive and encouraging way. Yes, the presentation is going to be hard. You might have to speak for a long time and you're going to be nervous. But if you're mean to yourself, if you're very strict, if you're not supportive, it only makes it harder. It only puts the barriers higher. It only makes the anxiety more of a focal point in your mind while you're trying to speak. So speak to yourself as if you were speaking to your 12-year-old self. Be encouraging, be supportive. Now, that's not only important before the presentation, it is important during. If you notice that you may have messed up, you stumbled, or you said something out of place, that's okay. Your audience is more sympathetic than we realize because, again, we're all a little nervous presenting, so we're not going to hold it against you. But it's also really important to be encouraging and supporting after the presentation. Presentations are hard, so give yourself some credit, give yourself some support and encouragement after as well. So those are my keys for taking control of the situation to bring your anxiety down and bring your confidence up is pay attention to your diet, what you're putting into your body that day. Take control of your attire. Wear things that you know fits the context of the presentation, but are also things that you like. I don't necessarily like wearing ties a lot, but when I have to, I always wear ones that I like because it helps me feel better about the situation. Make sure you're breathing. It's an instinctual body movement, but sometimes we can forget to do it. We get so focused on delivering presentations and we run out of breath and anxiety goes up. So breathe. It really makes a big difference. Speak early if you can, and pay attention to your self-talk. Be encouraging, be supportive. So that's all of it, but let's go quick summary. So the keys for practicing and for preparing is articulate a lot. Say the things that you intend on saying at every stage of the development of your presentation. At the very beginning, say the most basic parts. This is my topic, this is my point, and these are my details. And then as you're building it out, you're saying all the things that you're building into your presentation. You're saying the things that you don't want in your presentation. You're repeating your main point often so that it becomes instinctual, so that in the moment, you don't have to think about what your main point is. It just flows because at this point in your presentation, you've already said it 500 times. So practice a lot. And then lastly, just remember those nerves are normal. And the ways that we can kind of bring them down is with small actions, taking control of small things that reduce our anxiety, but simultaneously build our confidence. As always, I really appreciate y'all coming. We have plenty of time for questions, and we can ask questions and about anything. It doesn't have to be about practicing or preparation. I wanted to just kind of have a decent amount of time to address any questions that any of you might have. So feel free to ask any questions, make any comments, but if not, we're also done and you can enjoy the rest of your day.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If it's optional to do like a very short, let's say 3-minute presentation, for instance, I need to write a thesis prospectus and I'm meeting with the 4 professors in the department over Zoom. It's not necessary to do a presentation, but I'm just wondering if it's an optional thing. Do you recommend to do like a short sort of slideshow in conjunction with just meeting, as opposed to like, I'm just, hi, here I am, I'm ready to
Yeah.
talk?
It for a meeting like that, since it's not, a scheduled or required presentation, for a meeting like that, it's about you and what's most comfortable for you and how can you most effectively convey that information. So if that means that you have a short presentation or a couple of slides, that's totally okay. But I would just communicate that. So, that meeting starts or even beforehand, send out an email and like, just so y'all know, I have a few slides to help me stay organized. I'm sharing them with you so you can see them, and I'll go through these briefly in our meeting, right? So communicating that to them helps them prepare and know, what format they can expect. And it helps you also just be a little more prepared for that situation as well. But if it's not, if they haven't, specified it, it's kind of up to you. And again, it just comes down to, you should just communicate that to them. But I think it would be totally acceptable in that situation to just have a few slides and just let them know, like, this is helping me stay organized and communicate effectively with you all, which is the point. So I think it would be totally acceptable.
Would you recommend sharing this slideshow beforehand? Like, I noticed you do it, you've been doing it with the presentations.
Yeah, I would. I would share it beforehand. I probably wouldn't, in these, I've just uploaded them into the chat. I would probably just do that, especially if it's a shorter one. Like you said, it was only a few minutes. So they're not going to have a bunch of slides to go through. If you have 60 slides, I would email it to them beforehand, maybe like the day before.
Okay.
But if it's only 10 to 15 slides, I would just upload it into the chat. And you're going to be sharing screen anyways. And so they're going to see it, but then, uploading it into the chat gives them the option of having it. So that's how I would approach that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Normally you do a presentation, you won't just give a presentation itself, but after presentation, you normally have a Q&A section, and you cannot predict what the questions that come from your audience. I mean, how do you normally prepare for this part, this very improvisational?
So one thing that I've done, and I know other people do this as well, is find some people in your network, in your life, that you can say, hey, I need to practice my presentation, but I need practice with questions. So I'm going to give this presentation, but I need you to think of some questions to ask me at the end so I can have practice. And so when you're looking for people to ask if they're willing to do it, think about people that might give good questions. Because I think about, if I were to do it, the first 2 people I would think of asking would be my 2 best friends. One of them is better for the question aspect than the other. So I wouldn't ask the other. I would ask the one that I know is going to have a lot of questions. And then you can start, all right, well, let's maybe be a little more challenging about this. So I'll ask one of my professors if they have 10 minutes to help me, to ask me some questions. So it helps for you to sit and anticipate questions, write them down, ask the questions out loud to yourself, but also see if there's people in your network. And that's one thing that I'd happily do for you. So if you emailed me like, hey, I have a presentation coming up, I need some practice with questions, would you be willing to listen to my presentation and then ask me some questions at the end? The answer will be yes. So that's one way to participate or prepare for that.
Yeah, this is a very good suggestion. No matter for our graduate students, we all need to have defense and go for a conference. So given the presentation itself won't make me so nervous, but the question coming afterwards make me so nervous. You don't have so much time to prepare normally.
Yeah. And so that's actually one of the reasons why I suggest, knowing what your point is not. Because so one of my favorite things is when somebody asks a question and I can respond with, that's an excellent question, but that's outside the scope of my study. because a lot of time audience, they'll think that their question is related, but it's only parallel to your topic. It's not actually related. And to tell them like, it's a good question, but I'm not going to answer that. It's one of the best feelings ever, because you have control over the situation, and you present yourself as very knowledgeable about your topic because you also know what your topic is not. And so that's one way to prepare for questions, is knowing, exactly what your presentation is, so you can identify that question isn't really related to my presentation. So if you really want to talk about it, you can email me, but right now that's not related, so I'm not going to answer that. So that's another way to prepare.
Oh, that's also very neat, and because based on my previous master and especially master thesis defense, and I noticed that the other committee members did not really read my work, so they raised up the question which are really not related. I can tell based on their questions. I know that.
Yeah. So I had that happen in my master's thesis defense. So my master's thesis was about basketball culture, specifically related to resilience for basketball players. And one of my committee members asked me about sport culture. And that's a great question, Dr. Burton, but my study is about basketball culture. So I can't comment on all of sport culture. I can only comment on basketball culture. So I was able to kind of hear in their question that it was kind of related, but not really. And that helped me answer that question. So that it's really helpful to think about your presentation in multiple ways, because it'll prepare you for questions that you may not be anticipating.
Yeah, and that's quite normal. But thanks for answering. Really...
For sure. Anything else?
I was wondering, could you share more of your experience and maybe mistakes you have made throughout your work? I think
so
those
there's
learning.
There's three experiences, three mistakes that are always present in my mind when I'm preparing for presentations. So during my bachelor's degree, we had this capstone course, right, where we were putting everything together that we learned about communication into a cohesive thing. And at this point, I had given not a lot of presentations, but some, and I'd gotten a lot of feedback. So I was feeling very confident in myself as a presenter. And the topic that I was presenting on was one that I was familiar with. So I did not prepare. I came in thinking, I'm a good presenter. I know this topic. I can just wing it and it'll be great. And it wasn't. It was terrible. I got my grade back and I got an F because there was absolutely no structure to my presentation. It was just me standing up there talking. I had no main point. I had no supporting details. I didn't tell any sort of cohesive story. I just got up there and talked. And my professor really hit me. She let me know that it was a terrible presentation because it lacked structure. So now when I'm preparing presentations, that's why I always start with those first three questions. What is my topic? What are the details? What is the point? Because that's the basic structure you need to follow. And then from there, I start building things in and I practice my presentation in that structure, because delivering a presentation that doesn't have a clear structure, and the thing is it's a normal structure. We expect presentations and written work to follow that organization of intro, body, conclusion. We expect that. And so as presenters, if we violate that expectation, it makes it harder for the audience to follow along. And so when I'm building presentations, I always make sure I'm following that very basic structure: topic in the introduction, details in the body, main point in the conclusion. So I learned that from that presentation. The next one was learning about controlling my body when I speak. I delivered back-to-back presentations, one of which it was scripted. I memorized the script word for word. It was 5 minutes. And so I was so focused on memorizing my script that in the moment, I didn't realize that I had my hands in my pocket the entire time and my body didn't move. I was like a statue. And all of my feedback from my peers and from my professor, they're like, dude, the speech was so good, but after 2 minutes of you not moving, that was the only thing I could pay attention to, was the fact that you were like a tree. And so, so there was that. And then the very next presentation I gave, I had a click pen in my hand and I was just clicking it the whole time. And so that's when it was like, okay, because the reason why I wasn't paying attention to my body, because I, again, was so focused on the content. So then it was like, all right, so when I'm practicing my presentation, it's not just about practicing what I'll say, it's about practicing movement while I'm speaking. So that's why when we record ourselves speaking, we want to pay attention to how we move, but we also want to just practice using our body while we're speaking so that we can get familiar with controlling both our verbal aspect and our nonverbal so that we can have better control of those in the situation. So now it's about practicing the structure and the content. Boom, I got that. That's step maybe 1 and 2. And then step 3 is practicing the organization, the content, and the movements so that I have better control of those in the situation. And then the last thing I learned is just the real importance of having transitions and always restating your main points. And I learned that from assessing the presentation of college freshmen. The poor souls, they're so nervous about presenting that they're nervous about not knowing and not saying the right content, that they only focus on every piece of information that they know related to that subject. And it's like, okay, well, what, you didn't transition, you didn't connect any of it, and you didn't have a main point. So I'm lost as a listener. So seeing that was like, okay, know your content, have clear structure, practice using your body in the moment, and have a clear main point that you've restated several times. You do those things, your audience will remember what you're talking about. And that's how I learned those things from experience.
Great. Now, another question, if we still have time.
12
What
minutes.
happens if, for whatever reason, you're getting in trouble with your time?
Oh, yeah. So that is one of the things that I wish I would have had that in the slides. So there was the slide where I said, the first slide put up the whole outline and it was like, do these things one by one on note cards. The next slide had the whole outline and it said practicing technology. I should have included time yourself there, have a timer so that you can see where the timing is. And you also want to know the timing of each section so that, maybe you have 10 minutes and your introduction is 1 minute, and each main point is 2.5 minutes. So that by the time you get to, you should be starting your third main point at the 6-minute mark, and you see that you're at the 7-minute mark. You need to know how to just say that main point right away. So that's just one of the things that you want to do when you're practicing these individual sections. Look at the timing of it. And also, that's the other reason why you want to practice your speech very small, right? So you can just say, the third main point is that be kind to yourself when you're preparing. And you can just say it really quickly, matter-of-factly, one sentence in case your time runs out. So that's why I say, practice articulating in many different ways. Say as much as you possibly can about it, but also say as little as you possibly can about that specific point, so that in case you notice that you're running out of time, you can still make those key points in a concise way. So that's why you start small and build upwards, because in those moments of no time, you can rely on that small start. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that at least make a lot of points to me, because I was thinking about my first lifetime of conference presentation.
Mhm.
I practiced a lot before I went to the conference. I practiced, but no one told me how many minutes should I have in that conference. That was happened long time ago.
Yeah.
Then I practiced based on 15 minutes standard, but after I really got there, the conference room, the lecture room, I was told that I had only 8 minutes. So that means that but I didn't prepare for the 8 minutes thing. So the only thing that I could do is to speak extremely so fast. And then, so afterwards, but the overall effect was not really good, because afterwards, every audience come to me and they said that your points is really good, we're interested, but you speak
fast.
so fast.
Mhm.
But this is a problem. But I appreciate your point that to break it down into a small chunks and
Mhm.
really time yourself based on really small chunk and time
Mhm.
yourself carefully and to prepare to have a second plan, backup plan for
Yeah.
each points. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that
And it's also really important to, you know, we can't assume. We have to get verification of how long our speaking time is. But the other thing to get verification of is speaking order, like knowing who's speaking before you, knowing who's speaking after you. Because if you can tie your presentation into those, it makes you seem more engaging because you have this really good grasp of your material. But those are some of the contextual factors of the presentation setting that we need to know as part of our presentation. I actually ran into that issue myself when I was preparing my thesis defense. Nobody told me how long it was supposed to be, and I thought I had to just say everything. What my first, it was an hour and 20 minutes, and then I messaged my friend the day before, like, "Hey, just check, how long should my thesis defense be?" And she's like, 15 minutes. It's like, oh my god, I have to condense 80 minutes into 15. And if, oh my, I was very lucky that for whatever reason I had asked her the night before, because I would have gone into that prepared to speak for an hour and a half and they're expecting 15. So it's just, for me, that was a very good example of always double check how long I'm speaking for. Carmen, did you have another question?
Yes, last question. What if you forget, despite all the practicing and everything, but what if you forget something, to say something, and you realize later on? Would you like try to go back to it or and still
So
say it, or just let it go? And
are you, when you say later on, do you mean just later on in the presentation? Or do
yes.
you mean, okay. Yeah, if you have time and it's clear in your mind how to connect that thing that you missed to where you are now, go ahead and do it. It's totally okay. Now, if you remember the thing that you forgot to say, but in the moment you can't entirely see how that connects to where you are, just keep going. It becomes too much. Now I say all that, that's a lot of thinking that you have to do in the moment. It's very hard. So for me, when I forget things, I let them be lost. I just let them be forgotten.
Okay. I
If
mean,
you,
people won't know that you forgot something, but you know.
yeah,
So I get
exactly.
stressed during my presentation because I'm like, oh no, I forgot to say this. And I want to. Okay.
And there's a chance that you'll get the opportunity to bring that up, right? So I forgot to put in time yourself, but I had that opportunity to bring it back up because there was a question asked about timing. So that's why I would say, just it's better to just let it go. If you forget it, just let it go. If it's one of the key points of your presentation, you're most likely not going to forget it because you've practiced articulating it so many times. So if it's something that you forgot, you can maybe use that logic of like, well, I forgot it because it's not that important. It's not necessarily true, but it might help you in the moment. For me, it's about just flowing through the presentation. Those moments where you get caught up, whether it's because you realized you forgot something or you made eye contact with somebody and you weren't ready for it, just keep going. Just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. That's the most important part.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Any last questions? Right on. I I really appreciate y'all coming. I've really loved that they've been small webinars, and I've really appreciated that most of you have been to all of them. That just kind of made my day. I feel like we're a team, and it makes me happy. So I really appreciate y'all's presence and participation. Again, my email is on the slides. My email is on those handouts. Any presentation help you ever need, send me an email, and I'm ready to help you. It can be simple things of like, I'll ask you questions. It can be simple things of, I just want to practice. I need to have conversations. Anything presentation related, I'm here to help.
Thank you so much. This
Right
was
on.
very useful.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
Have a nice day, everybody.
You too. Bye.